Step back. You don't belong here. The officer's palm pressed flat against his chest, fingers spread like a barrier of law. The words weren't shouted, but they landed like sirens in the air. The man in the dark suit did not flinch. His shoulders squared, his breath steady, his gaze fixed. Behind him, the glass facade of the building gleamed with its golden letters, King Solutions. Employees spilled out onto the steps, their chatter silenced into suspicion. Phones hovered half-raised, curiosity wrestling with hesitation. The officer smiled as if he had already won. No ID, no entry. Don't make me repeat myself. His badge glinted under the morning sun, but it wasn't the shine of authority that drew eyes. It was the way his hand lingered, pressing down, as if daring the man to resist. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Who is he? Probably lost. He looks like trouble. The man remained silent. The silence itself became louder than protest. It was the kind of silence that unsettles, that stretches seconds into knives. A young analyst near the back raised her phone slightly, whispering, "This feels wrong." Another voice replied, "Relax. They know what they're doing." Yet the unease thickened, weaving into the warm September air. The officer leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Don't test me. I know your type." He adjusted his grip, thumb pressing near the lapel, right where a wedding ring on his hand caught the light. The gesture wasn't procedure, it was provocation. Still, the man in the suit didn't move. He had seen this scene before. At 22, it was a bank lobby. At 30, an airport gate. Different uniforms, same tone. You don't belong. And now, at 45, it echoed again outside the very building his vision had raised from concrete to glass. "Sir, step back!" The officer's voice cut sharper, drawing a few gasps. A middle-aged manager in a navy blazer chuckled loud enough for others to hear. "He thinks he's somebody." Laughter scattered, brief but heavy, like stones thrown at dignity. The man inhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. He said nothing. His silence wasn't submission, it was calculation. Every second he stood still, the tension grew like a rope pulled taut. And then, the officer shoved, a firm push meant to humiliate, meant to send a message to the crowd. Order had triumphed. The man's shoes scraped against the stone, but he didn't stumble. He only stepped back once, anchoring himself as if the ground itself had chosen sides. Phones lifted higher now. The red dots of recording lights blinked like watchful eyes. One voice broke through the hush. "Why are they treating him like this?" Another hissed back. "Because he doesn't belong." The man in the suit finally lifted his head, eyes meeting the officer's without blinking. The crowd leaned in, sensing a shift. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't move the officer's hand away. He simply let the silence sharpen into steel, and that silence asked one question no one dared speak. What happens when the man you dismiss is the one who holds every key? The officer's hand stayed pressed to his chest, but the man didn't resist. He stood steady, a shadow against the glass tower rising behind him. His suit wasn't flashy black wool, tailored but plain, no tie pin, no pocket square, the kind of outfit that whispered authority instead of begging for it. No entourage, no chauffeur, no badge of status except the calm in his eyes. It was intentional. He had walked here alone, from the curb to the steps, without announcement. No company car, no assistant at his side. Just a man and the building that carried his name, though not a single soul in the crowd recognized it. From the sidelines, whispers stacked. He doesn't have clearance. Why would he even try? Probably just another protester. A junior employee, barely out of grad school, frowned. She had been in the company less than 6 months, yet something about this man's stance unsettled her. He wasn't lost. He wasn't pleading. He was standing as though he'd already been here 1,000 times. The officer tapped his radio. "Control, we've got a non-compliant individual at the main gate." The static buzz filled the air, the kind that makes a crowd stiffen. Behind him, another guard shifted closer, his arms folded tight across his chest. The man in the suit didn't break eye contact. His voice, when it finally came, was low and steady. "You're making a mistake." The officer scoffed. "You don't even have ID." He did. A platinum access badge rested in the inside pocket of his jacket, but he left it there. This wasn't a test of systems. It was a test of people. He had seen enough polished glass and steel in his career to know a company wasn't measured by its buildings, but by those who guarded its doors. At 31, he had been denied entry to a hotel lobby despite holding a confirmed reservation. At 38, An airport security line forced him to step aside for extra screening while his colleagues breezed through. Each time he said nothing, noted everything, and built higher, higher, until silence became its own kind of strategy. Now, at 45, he stood outside a headquarters worth billions, surrounded by employees who thought he was an intruder. One of them, a man in a gray tie, coffee still in hand, smirked. Maybe he just wants a picture out front. Don't we all? The laughter that followed was quick, sharp, and ugly. The officer pressed harder against his chest. Last warning, step back or you'll regret it. The man's gaze flicked briefly to the crowd, then back to the officer. His silence said more than words. Regret doesn't belong to me today. Around them, the building's glass reflected the morning sun like a mirror, capturing every phone lens now raised, every glance of curiosity hardening into judgment. Yet in that reflection, if anyone looked closely enough, they would see the truth. His calm wasn't defiance. It was ownership. And soon, the people laughing at him would realize they weren't keeping him out. They were keeping themselves in. The crowd had grown thicker. Employees lingered on the steps, some clutching lattes, some clutching phones, all eager to see what would unfold. The officer's stance hardened, as though each second of silence was defiance in itself. "Control!" he barked into the radio, sending backup to the front entrance. His voice echoed against the marble walls, the kind of official tone that always drew authority on his side. Another guard, heavier, taller, stepped forward. His belt clinked with keys, his gaze scanning the man in the suit like scanning for weapons. "What's the issue?" "He refuses to show ID," the officer answered, never removing his hand from the man's chest. "Claims he belongs here." The taller guard chuckled. "In that suit? Belongs here doing what, janitorial night shift?" Laughter cracked from somewhere in the crowd, thin, nervous, but enough to sting. The man stayed silent. The young analyst at the back bit her lip. She shifted, uncomfortable, whispering to the colleague beside her. "He doesn't look like he's lying." The colleague rolled his eyes. "Please, if he had business here, they'd know him." The taller guard leaned closer, his breath heavy. "Listen, we've had scammers before. Slick suits, fake stories. You're not special." He jabbed a finger toward the door behind him. "Inside is restricted. You want the visitor desk? It's 2 blocks down. Try your luck there." Phones clicked. Someone was filming. Another was streaming. The man in the suit could feel it, the atmosphere changing from casual dismissal to spectacle. "Move him back," the officer ordered. The second guard stepped in, shoulder brushing the man's. "We'll give you one chance. Leave quietly, or we'll escort you off the property." The word escort wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat. For the first time, the man moved. Not his feet, his eyes. He glanced past the guards to the engraved letters high above the entrance. King Solutions. The name he had chosen 2 decades ago, the brand carved from long nights and harder beginnings. The crowd misread the glance as hesitation. A young man in a slim suit smirked. "See? He's stalling. Doesn't even know where he is." The taller guard spread his arms, blocking the path entirely. "Time's up. Step back, or we'll remove you." The man exhaled once, calm, controlled. He didn't raise his voice. "You should reconsider," the officer scoffed. "We don't reconsider for trespassers." He tapped the badge on his chest, as though metal could erase arrogance. And then it happened, the first shove. Quick, dismissive, meant to send the man stumbling down the steps like an unwelcome guest. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A phone camera zoomed closer. The man didn't stumble. He planted his feet, spine straight, eyes level. The silence that followed was louder than the push itself. The taller guard muttered under his breath, "Stubborn fool." The officer raised his radio again. "Escalation at main gate. Prepare removal." Every phone in the crowd rose higher. What had started as curiosity was now evidence. The scene was no longer just a power play at the door of a skyscraper. It was becoming history, documented second by second, streamed into living rooms and feeds far beyond these steps. The man in the suit finally spoke again, his words measured, heavy as stone. "When this ends, it won't be me regretting it." The crowd hushed. Even the officer blinked, but his pride refused to yield. He shoved again, louder this time. "You don't belong here!" And with that, the escalation had begun. The shove should have rattled him. That was the officer's intent: humiliate first, control second. But the man in the suit didn't move the way they expected. He steadied himself, spine tall, hands still resting calmly at his sides. No clenched fists, no raised voice. Just silence. The silence unnerved them. It stretched across the steps, filling the gaps between sirens in the distance and the faint hum of traffic on the boulevard. A silence that said, "You think you've won, but the game hasn't even started." The taller guard shifted uncomfortably. "What's wrong with him? Why isn't he talking?" he muttered, low enough for a few in the crowd to hear. From the back, the young analyst whispered, "He doesn't need to." Phones kept rising, angles catching every flicker of expression. But the man's face revealed nothing calm like stone carved against the storm. He inhaled once, the breath of someone accustomed to long battles fought without shouting. The officer leaned in again, trying to pierce the stillness. "You deaf? I told you to step back." His voice cracked slightly, betraying irritation. The louder he became, the quieter the man seemed to stand. It was not passivity. It was restraint weaponized. A woman in a red blazer, standing just a few steps away, frowned. She whispered to her colleague, "Look at him. That's not fear. That's something else." Her colleague shrugged it off. "Please, if he had power, he'd use it by now." But that was the mistake. They confused silence for weakness, when in truth, it was preparation. The man's mind flicked back years earlier, a hotel lobby in Atlanta. He had been younger, travel-worn, denied a suite despite a confirmed booking. He remembered the clerk's words, "People like you can't afford this." He had said nothing then, too, but he had taken notes, built plans, and years later, bought the hotel chain outright. Now, on the steps of the company he founded, the silence returned not as shame, but as strategy. The officer jabbed his chest again, desperate to provoke. "Say something, admit you don't belong." The man's gaze didn't waver. He simply looked at the officer as though studying him not with fear, but with calculation, as if measuring how far a small man in a uniform would go before realizing how little ground he stood on. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. Phones trembled in hands. Someone whispered, "Why isn't he fighting back?" Another answered, "Because he knows something we don't." The tension became unbearable. Every heartbeat on those steps sounded louder than traffic, louder than radios, louder than laughter. And still, the man in the suit remained motionless, calm, patient, waiting. The crowd didn't yet know what they were witnessing, but soon they would understand this was not a man cornered. This was a man setting the stage. It started with one phone. A junior employee at the edge of the crowd raised her camera, hands trembling, eyes locked on the scene. She wasn't bold, not usually, but something about the way the man stood unmoving, unshaken, compelled her to document it. The red light blinked alive. "Are you filming?" her colleague hissed. "Yes," she whispered back. "People need to see this." The officer noticed. His jaw tightened. "Put that away," he barked, voice cutting through the crowd. "This isn't a spectacle." But it already was. The command only drew more phones from pockets and purses. A ripple moved across the steps. Glowing screens lifted higher, lenses catching the stillness of the man in the suit, the aggression of the officers, the murmurs of onlookers who weren't sure which side of history they were standing on. "Why are they pushing him?" someone asked softly. "Because he's not supposed to be here," another voice muttered, but even that sounded less certain now. A woman in a gray pencil skirt stepped forward, not with her phone but with her voice. "This feels excessive. He hasn't done anything." Her words hung heavy in the air, daring others to echo them. From behind, a man in a tailored jacket whispered, "Shh, don't get involved. You'll regret it." But silence was cracking. The young analyst with the phone raised her chin and said louder, "He didn't even move when they shoved him. That's not resistance, that's restraint." The officer spun toward her, eyes narrowing. "Stay out of this." His tone carried the sharpness of authority, but the crowd had already shifted. The more he tried to suppress, the more eyes turned, the more cameras rolled. Near the steps, an older woman clasped her handbag tighter. "I've seen this before," she murmured, half to herself, half to anyone listening. "Different year, different uniform, always the same." The taller guard sneered. "This isn't about race, lady, this is about protocol." The words sparked a murmur, low and dangerous. The crowd wasn't convinced. Protocol didn't look like humiliation. Protocol didn't look like shoving a man who stood silent in front of his own building. A student with earbuds dangling from his neck muttered into his stream, "I'm live at King Solutions HQ, and you won't believe what I'm seeing right now." Comments flew across his screen faster than he could read. "Who is he? Looks like profiling. Keep recording." The man in the suit remained silent, but his presence was amplified now not by his voice, but by witnesses who were finding theirs. The officer barked again, "Disperse! This isn't your business." But it was. The moment he said it, the crowd knew it. Their business was truth, and truth was unfolding on the steps in front of them. And as more cameras rose, the man in the suit didn't move. He didn't need to. Every second he stood still, the story was no longer his alone. It was theirs, too. The officer's radio crackled again. Reinforcements were on their way. The weight of his hand on the man's chest pressed harder now. Not just a warning, but a declaration. "I am in control." The taller guard smirked at the crowd, trying to reclaim authority. "Phones don't change facts. This man has no clearance. End of story." But the story wasn't ending. It was unraveling. A manager in a navy blazer pushed through the line of employees, his polished shoes clicking against the stone steps. He looked at the man in the suit with disdain, then turned to the officer. Why hasn't he been removed yet? His tone dripped with irritation, the way someone speaks when their schedule is inconvenienced. "He's refusing to step back," the officer replied. The manager scoffed. "Then drag him off. People like this waste our time." The crowd stiffened. Those words, "people like this," didn't land as quietly as he thought. Several phones zoomed in, microphones straining to capture every syllable. The young analyst muttered under her breath, "Did he really just say that?" A few heads nodded. The tension shifted from a confrontation to something heavier, open prejudice. The man in the suit still hadn't moved. His silence was now louder than their threats. The manager stepped closer, sneer sharpening. "Let me be clear. You don't belong in this building. You don't belong in this company. So unless you want to be cuffed and escorted out like a criminal, leave." He leaned back, arms folded, satisfied with his performance. But his words had crossed a line, and everyone knew it. A murmur rose from the crowd. "That's too much. Why would he say that? This doesn't look right." The officer, emboldened by the manager's stance, shoved the man in the suit again, harder this time. Last chance. The phones caught it all, the sharp push, the unmoving figure, the sharp intake of breath from the crowd. A woman in a red blazer shouted from the side, "He hasn't done a thing. You're escalating this." The taller guard snapped back, "Ma'am, step aside or you'll be removed too." That threat only fueled the murmurs. The steps outside King Solutions no longer sounded like routine enforcement, they sounded like injustice echoing through a microphone, amplified by every lens watching. The man in the suit inhaled slowly, eyes lifting toward the sky above the glass tower. He didn't speak, but the look on his face was unmistakable, calm calculation. And in that moment, the crowd realized the truth. This wasn't just about a man being denied entry. This was about a system being exposed, word by word, push by push, all under the weight of witnesses who would not unsee what was happening. The officer lifted his radio one more time. "Control," requesting full removal. His voice was steady, certain. But the certainty was his illusion. The man in the suit hadn't resisted once. And still, it was the guards and the manager whose control was slipping unraveling in front of an audience they couldn't silence. The mouth-worn had grown beyond a doorway. It was now the entire company's reputation on trial. The second shove had left the air electric, buzzing with anger and disbelief. Yet the man in the suit still hadn't raised his voice, still hadn't moved. His calm was a mirror, and in that mirror the guards saw their own aggression, magnified. The manager in the navy blazer wasn't satisfied. His pride needed a display, something bigger than words. He snapped his fingers at the taller guard. "Take his belongings. Verify who he really is." The guard grinned, eager. He reached for the man's leather briefcase, a slim, black case that rested against the steps. Without asking, without hesitation, he yanked it up and tossed it open. Papers spilled. A tablet clattered against the stone. The sound sharp enough to cut through the murmurs. Gasps erupted. Phones zoomed in. The young analyst whispered, horrified, "That's theft." The guard smirked, boot nudging the tablet. "If it's legit, we'll find proof. If not, we'll find lies." The manager crouched, rifling through the scattered documents like a prosecutor searching for evidence. "This looks fake," he muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. He held up a contract page, shaking it as if it were damning proof. "Anyone can print paper." The man in the suit didn't react. Not to the theft, not to the humiliation. He simply straightened his posture, hands folded behind his back, as though the scene wasn't unraveling him, it was unraveling them. The officer grabbed the tablet and held it up. Unlocked device. Suspicious files. maybe corporate theft. He turned to the crowd, trying to sell the performance. This is why protocol exists. People like him walk in and think they own the place. That last sentence landed harder than the shove. People like him. Phones caught it. Microphones caught it. The crowd stiffened with fury. A woman in the red blazer shouted again, voice breaking with outrage. "You can't just steal his things! That's illegal!" "Ma'am, step back," the officer barked. But the tide was shifting. A man in the crowd raised his phone higher and said clearly, "No, keep recording. They're crossing every line." The manager, still holding the scattered contract, sneered down at the silent man. "Pathetic. If you really belonged here, you'd prove it. Instead, you stand mute while we expose you." The taller guard bent, scooping up the tablet. He pressed it into the officer's hands. "Call it in. Fraud, trespassing, theft. Take your pick." The officer lifted his radio, ready to brand the man a criminal over the airwaves. And through it all, the man in the suit remained unmoved. His silence, his restraint, his patience, it was more powerful than their noise. The crowd, however, was no longer silent. Murmurs surged louder, disapproval spilling down the steps like rolling thunder. "This isn't right. That's not policy. They're humiliating him." The manager raised his voice above the noise, pointing at the man as though delivering a verdict. "You don't belong here. You're a fraud, and in 5 minutes you'll be gone." The crowd recoiled. The phones stayed steady, and the moment stretched, unbearable, until it was clear this wasn't just confrontation anymore. It was violation. The man's tablet lay in the officer's grip, his papers scattered like trash across the steps. The taller guard folded his arms, proud of the display. The manager smirked at the cameras, certain the crowd would side with authority. But then, the man in the suit moved for the first time. Not with fists, not with anger. With precision, he reached calmly into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and pressed one button. His voice was measured, unshaken. "Activate protocol." A pause. Then a female voice answered instantly through the speaker. Clear, professional, unmistakable. "Protocol is live, sir. All feeds connected. Do you want me to escalate?" The crowd shifted. Whispers turned to gasps. Phones caught every syllable. The officer's brow furrowed, suddenly less certain. The man spoke again, steady as stone. "Escalate." On the other end, the assistant didn't hesitate. "Confirmed. Internal systems notified. Legal and compliance are monitoring in real time." The manager laughed nervously. "Cute trick. A phone call isn't going to save you." He bent down, waving one of the scattered contracts like it was meaningless. "You're bluffing." But as he said it, the building itself seemed to answer. The glass doors behind the guards clicked, locks disengaging with a mechanical hum. A faint tone chimed security systems shifting. Several employees glanced at their badges, startled as their access lights blinked red, then green, then red again, like the system was reconfiguring on the spot. The taller guard muttered, "What the hell is that?" The officer's radio crackled. A voice from control panicked. We're seeing strange overrides on the mainframe. Who authorized this?" The man in the suit didn't move. He only said, calm and cutting, "I did." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Someone whispered, "Who is this guy?" Another answered, "Who has authority like that?" The manager scoffed louder, trying to drown the doubt. "You're still nothing. A call doesn't make you belong here." But the assistant's voice rang out again through the phone. "Sir, live feed established. Every word spoken on those steps is logged and transmitted to the board. Control staff are aware you are present." The man finally raised his eyes, scanning the crowd. His silence had been a shield. Now, his words were a blade. "Keep recording," he said, not to the officer, not to the manager, but to the witnesses with their phones raised. "Let them see. Let them hear, because the truth doesn't need me to shout." The officer lowered the tablet slightly, grip uncertain. The taller guard glanced toward the doors as if waiting for instructions that weren't coming. And the manager, suddenly pale, realized the shift. The man they had tried to humiliate was no longer standing alone. He was standing with the weight of the entire system behind him. The first strike of the counterattack had landed, and he hadn't even raised his voice. The steps had gone quiet. Not silent in the way they had before, this quiet was heavier, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. The officer still clutched the tablet, but his grip was trembling. The manager's smirk had thinned into a nervous line. The taller guard kept glancing at the glass doors as though they might betray him. The man in the suit finally moved forward, not forced, not hurried. One deliberate step, then another. The officer instinctively raised his arm to block him again, but this time his hand froze mid-air. Something in the man's eyes made it impossible to touch him. "You keep saying I don't belong here," the man said, his voice steady, carrying across the crowd. "You called me a trespasser, a fraud, a criminal." He paused, letting the words hang long enough for every phone lens to drink them in. But the truth is simpler. He turned slightly, just enough for the cameras to catch the glass tower looming above them, the golden letters etched into the facade. King Solutions. "This building," he continued, his tone neither loud nor rushed, "is mine." Gasps broke out, sharp and involuntary. The officer's eyes widened. The manager blinked, lips parting, searching for denial but finding none. The man let the silence return for one heartbeat, then two, before finishing. "My name is David King, founder, majority shareholder, the one who signs your paychecks, writes your policies, and owns the ground you're standing on." The words landed like thunder. A woman in the crowd covered her mouth, whispering, "No way." The young analyst's phone shook in her hands, her live feed exploding with comments. "He owns it? This is insane. They're harassing their own CEO." The officer stammered, voice cracking. That can't be." He looked at the tablet in his hands as if it might burn him. The screen had already lit up with an internal login screen marked, "King Executive Override." The taller guard's shoulders slumped. The authority he thought he carried melted into fear. The manager tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. You expect us to believe that?" David didn't even look at him. "You don't need to believe me. Your system already does." As if on cue, the glass doors behind them slid open with a soft hiss. Two executives stepped out, badges glowing green. Their faces were pale, shaken, as they recognized him. One whispered to the other, "It's really him." The crowd erupted gasps, murmurs, phones held even higher. No one was laughing anymore. David turned his gaze back to the officer, his voice low but cutting. "You called me a fraud in the company I built. You mistook silence for weakness. That was your last mistake." And with that, the revelation was complete. The man they had tried to erase wasn't an intruder. He was the power they served. The name struck like lightning. David King, founder, majority shareholder, CEO. For a heartbeat, the steps outside King Solutions froze. No one moved. No one breathed. Then the shock rippled outward. The officer dropped the tablet as though it had scalded him. It hit the stone with a hollow crack, screen splintering into a spiderweb of glass. His lips parted, but no words came. Authority drained from his body, leaving only panic. The taller guard stumbled back a step. His hands twitched near his belt, then away, like a man who suddenly realized his uniform no longer shielded him. His eyes darted between David and the crowd, searching for escape. The manager's face went pale, then red, then pale again. He opened his mouth, perhaps to deny, perhaps to apologize, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time, his confidence cracked, and everyone saw it. The employees on the steps shifted uneasily. Some hid their phones, embarrassed to be caught recording their own boss. Others filmed more fervently, sensing history unraveling live. Gasps and whispers cascaded through the crowd. "Wait, that's him? They stopped their own CEO? This is unbelievable." A woman in the red blazer shook her head in disbelief. "You harassed the man who built this place." Her voice carried like a verdict. The officer swallowed hard, voice trembling. "Sir, I didn't know." David's eyes cut toward him, sharp enough to silence the excuse. He didn't need to speak. The officer's face crumbled under the weight of unspoken judgment. The manager tried again, desperate. "Mr. King, this is a misunderstanding." But even as he said it, the crowd rejected it. A student shouted, "A misunderstanding? You shoved him. You stole his things. We all saw it." Phones lifted higher, proof undeniable. The taller guard whispered, almost to himself, "We're finished." Inside the glass doors, executives had gathered, wide-eyed and motionless. One clutched a phone to his ear, murmuring urgently, no doubt to the board. Another simply watched, shame etched across her face. The young analyst with the live feed turned her camera toward the guards. Her voice shook with anger. "You said he didn't belong. You said he was a fraud, but look at him. He owns this." The officer looked at the ground, face ashen. The taller guard muttered a curse. The manager wiped at his brow, sweat cutting through his mask of authority. It was no longer just a confrontation. It was collapse, authority inverted, stripped bare in front of witnesses and cameras that would not forget. David stood in the center of it all, unmoving, calm. He didn't need to gloat. The sight of their unraveling was victory enough. Every guard, every manager, every doubter, they were no longer enforcers. They were defendants, trembling on the steps of the empire he built. The collapse had already begun, but David wasn't finished. Calmly, he reached down, lifted his fallen tablet, and pressed a single button on the cracked screen. "Carla," he said, his voice even, "initiate removals." The assistant's voice came through instantly, sharp and professional. "Understood. Security staff IDs flagged. Access privileges revoked. Processing now." The officer's radio crackled alive before he could react. "Access denied" blared across the control channel. His badge beeped red at his hip. He tapped it against the scanner beside the glass doors. "Denied." Again denied. No, this can't," he stammered, pounding the scanner with the heel of his hand. The taller guard tried his badge. Red. He swiped again, faster, desperate. Red. His face drained as he realized the truth. The building itself was shutting him out. Phones in the crowd caught every frantic attempt. Murmurs surged like a wave. "They're locked out. He just fired them right here in front of everyone." David's gaze fell on the manager, still clutching the stolen contract. "Effective immediately. Your position is terminated. Access suspended. Legal notified." The manager dropped the paper as if it burned him. His face flushed, hands trembling. You can't just..." But the words died as his badge buzzed red in his pocket. "Denied." He pulled it out, stared at the flashing light, and the panic broke through his mask. He looked up at David, voice cracking. "Please, I didn't mean..." David's tone cut him off, low and final. "You called me a fraud in a company I built from the ground. You laid hands on me, stole from me, humiliated me in front of my people. You don't belong here." It was the reversal of every insult they had thrown. Now each word came back, sharpened, undeniable. The officer tried one last plea. "Sir, give us another chance. We were just following protocol." David's eyes narrowed. "Protocol never told you to profile. Protocol never told you to shove. That was your choice." The crowd erupted cheers from some, gasps from others. The young analyst, still streaming, whispered into her phone. He just dismantled all of them in seconds. The red blazer woman shook her head in awe. Without shouting, without lifting a hand, just power. The guards slumped, badges useless, their authority evaporated. The manager's voice had shrunk to a whisper, begging words lost under the roar of the crowd. And David, standing tall in the center of the steps, delivered the final order. "Escort them out. Effective immediately. They no longer represent King Solutions." Executives from inside moved forward, reluctant but obedient, guiding the disgraced men away under the eyes of the world. Every phone captured it. Every witness felt it. Justice, swift and silent, delivered without a shout. The steps of King Solutions were no longer a battleground. The guards were gone, their badges blinking useless red as they were led away. The manager's voice had vanished, replaced by the murmurs of employees who could not believe what they had witnessed. Phones still hovered, capturing the aftermath, proof that power had just changed hands in full view of the world. David King stood at the center, steady as ever. His suit was dusted with the fingerprints of men who thought they could erase him. His documents, once scattered like trash, were gathered neatly back into his case. His silence, once mocked, was now the loudest voice on the steps. He turned to the crowd. Not the officers, not the disgraced manager, but the employees, the witnesses, the people whose eyes had been opened. His tone was even, deliberate, carrying the weight of both judgment and promise. "Some of you laughed. Some of you doubted. Some of you recorded what you knew was wrong." His gaze swept across them. "And that's why this moment matters. Because respect should never depend on appearances. Because dignity isn't optional, it's required." No one spoke. The street noise seemed to bow out, leaving only his words hanging in the air. David let the silence breathe before he continued. "You called me a fraud, a trespasser. You told me I didn't belong. But the truth is I belong wherever I stand, because I've built the ground under my feet." Gasps, then applause. Not thunderous at first, hesitant, then swelling, like a tide rising from the edges of the crowd. Even those who had doubted him clapped, compelled by something deeper than protocol. The undeniable presence of justice delivered. David closed his case, lifted it smoothly, and stepped toward the doors. His final words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. "I don't need to film this moment," he said quietly. "I am the result of every moment like it." It was the kind of line that burned into memory, the kind of truth that lived longer than the spectacle. The doors slid open for him without resistance. Green lights blinked across the scanners, welcoming him home. He stepped inside, the crowd parting instinctively, silence following in his wake. Outside, the employees and bystanders stared at each other, their phones still recording, their disbelief shifting into awe. For them, this was more than a confrontation. It was a revelation. The man they had underestimated was not just a CEO. He was proof that dignity could stand taller than arrogance, that silence could roar louder than insults, that justice could be delivered without fists, without shouting, only presence. And as the glass doors closed behind him, one truth lingered in every witness's mind. Power doesn't ask for permission. It simply reminds you who it always was.